giving you more information when I don't know.
I remember coming to visit you kind of week after week in Oshawa, and I would tell you, I'm like, Stanley, I think you killed her. Do you remember that? And you would still talk to me.
I don't recall everything. I don't recall everything you said.
Sharmini Anandavel was a 15-year-old girl. She was just weeks away from leaving junior high. She last left her Toronto apartment building in June 1999. She told her family she was headed to a new job. 4 months later, however, her skeletal remains were found in a shallow grave in a wooded ravine right next to the Don River. And years later, to this day, nobody has been charged for her death. My name is Cameron. Welcome to True Red Crime. This is the case of Sharmini Anandavel. The police had a prime suspect from the very night she went missing. A 23-year-old neighbor who lived one floor down from her. Police interrogated him, searched his car and his apartment, put him under round-the-clock surveillance and interviewed those who knew him. You see, today he is actually in jail, but not for Sharmini's death. You see, Sharmini lived with her parents and her two brothers. They were in an apartment building in Toronto's Don Mills neighborhood area. The family had fled war in their homeland like many other immigrant families in the community. They had come from Sri Lanka 5 years earlier. I used to live in Toronto, by the way, one of the best cities in North America. Now, as for Sharmini, she left her house at 9 a.m. on June the 12th, 1999, on her way to the first day of a new job. Now, there were conflicting stories about where she was actually going. Her parents said she would be answering phones as a job arranged by a neighbor in the building. Her friends, however, thought no, that's not the new job that she got. One witness recalls seeing Sharmini sitting on a bench at Fairview Mall around 10:30 a.m. that morning. Another saw her alone in Peanut Plaza north of the mall around 11:45 a.m. In either case, she never returned home. Now, investigators had their own theory, working off what her friends had told them. Sharmini thought she was going to work undercover for an anti-drug police operation. How did that happen? Police did find a blank job application in her bedroom. This application was for something called the Metro Search Unit, an outfit that police later described as completely bogus. You see, this job application had a typo and was strangely worded. It only asked for her name, her date of birth, her address and her age. There were no spots to jot down unemployment history, references or even a social insurance number. Police believe this application was part of a ruse intended to lure her to the park where she was killed. Though they waited until 6 months after her remains were found to reveal this piece of evidence. That's a bit weird, isn't it? It seems someone posted a job that she could apply for. Here's your application form, get back to us. But having lived in Canada and now in America, when you fill in a job application, they ask you for everything, even your shoe size. Okay, they don't, but you know what I mean. Now, Matt Crone was a police officer for more than 30 years. He was one of the lead investigators on Sharmini's case. When the teen went missing, he said the local police department reached out to the homicide squad immediately. Sharmini did not fit the profile of a runaway teen. She was actually close with her parents. She did well in school and was looking forward to her graduation. She was steady, not impulsive. Therefore, Sharmini's disappearance prompted a massive search involving helicopters, volunteers, canvassing at the mall and dozens of police officers. In fact, even her parents banged on their neighbor's apartment door the first night when she didn't return home. You see, Sharmini had told them that the neighbor had helped her secure this job after all, but when they knocked on the door, nobody answered. The person in question, this neighbor, was Stanley Tippett. He had moved out 2 weeks earlier. You see, Stanley himself grew up in a single-parent household in the Toronto area, living in government housing with his mother and two brothers. Stanley was born with Treacher-Collins syndrome, a genetic disorder that affects speech. It also affects hearing and facial bone and tissue development, often causing deformities. His ears are undersized, with one sitting lower than the other, and his eyes slant down into a slightly sunken facial structure. As a result, Stanley was in special education classes for hearing impairment, and frequently bullied growing up by classmates and neighborhood kids. His mother said he was bullied up from time to time more than once. In fact, sometimes she had to get the police involved. By his early 20s, Stanley was living in the same apartment complex as the Anandavel family, just one floor down with his wife and toddler. Now, in 1999, Stanley said he had a relationship with many of the kids in the building. He would sometimes take them swimming at a nearby pool and taught some of them judo. Stanley told some of his kids that his facial deformities were the result of a mishap, and that it occurred while he was working with the police bomb squad. In fact, the police were interested in Stanley because Sharmini's parents believed he's the one that offered her the job that she was heading to on the way she disappeared. But not only that, he further piqued their interest in part because he was known to impersonate a cop. He had a jacket with the word police stitched across the back. He'd sometimes carry a nightstick and patrol the building. You know, the more I researched into him, the more he reminds me of the Zodiac Killer. Or at least the film Zodiac. He gives me that vibes. I could be wrong. Now, by the time of Sharmini's disappearance in 1999, Stanley had a history with police, one that would continue to grow in the years that followed. In 1998, Stanley told a group of young boys in the neighborhood that he was a police officer, seizing one of their bikes as part of a supposed operation. A little over a month later, police were called again after the building's superintendent said Stanley tried to make a fake arrest. But it goes further back. In 1991, Stanley was 16 years old. You know what he did? He set fire to a teacher's desk after stealing her keys, breaking into the classroom. What? We all want to leave the classroom. Why are you trying to break in? When I was 16 and I was in high school, do you know what I would do? You know, you get in America, you call them pins, when you pin paper onto the wall. Thumbtack? Is that what you call them? I think in England it's called a safety pin or something. I don't know. But either way, a pin to put paper on the wall. I would leave that on my teacher's desk. Like on the chair. I would just leave it there. So the teacher would come walking in, sit down. Oh, that's what you do if you want to mess around in class. Not break in and put the teacher's desk on fire. Then, a year later, Stanley was accused of following a young woman off a Toronto bus and attacking her. Court records say he approached her from behind, threw his arm around her waist and pointed a pellet gun to her head, pulling her into a laneway and instructed her to lie down. He was charged and convicted of attempted robbery. Court records say the quick-thinking teen got away unharmed by saying she had HIV and was menstruating. Wow, this guy, he's as weird as it gets. Now, back to Sharmini. Her remains were found by a father and son. They were both out for a walk in the East Don Parklands. A subsequent police search revealed a skull, some long bones, and a mandible, which police used to pull dental records, getting a match for Sharmini. The shallow grave was located next to a fallen log, right beside the Don River. The site had been ripped apart by coyotes in the ravine, with Sharmini's remains strewn throughout the woods. An excavation by foreign archaeologists later revealed some hair and blue fingernails, the same color polish Sharmini was wearing on the day she left home. But it had been 4 months since her disappearance, and given the summer heat, the proximity of the scene to a coyote's den, and some flooding in the ravine, police would not be able to find any DNA of the killer. So police questioned Stanley about Sharmini's disappearance multiple times over the course of the investigation, but he was never charged. Matt Crone, the investigator, said he believed Stanley was grooming Sharmini with the offer of a job, specifically choosing something that would have a certain amount of secrecy attached to it, one where she'd be discouraged from speaking to her friends and family about it, hence an undercover investigator. According to Crone, Stanley stationed Sharmini in the East Don Parklands where her remains were later found, giving her some tools and telling her to be on the lookout for drug dealers. In Crone's hypothesis, Stanley left to attend his lawn cutting job, then returned to Sharmini's location later, taking her life and burying her body. Afterward, he he cleaned his clothes and car at his in-laws' house, then took his car to a local garage to install its new engine. Crone was absolutely certain that Stanley was the one who did this. In fact, soon after the first interrogation, Crone said Stanley sold his car to a junkyard for about $10, despite having just put a new engine at a cost of around $1,000. $10. That's probably the same value as this water bottle. Police then seized the vehicle before it was slated to be crushed, but nothing was found in the car. Investigators noted the liner of its trunk had been removed. Police also believed the phony application found in Sharmini's bedroom was given to her by Stanley. The application was created using thermal paper. It was coated with a material that changes color when exposed to heat. It's commonly used to print receipts in cash registers or debit terminals. And in the years following Sharmini's death, Stanley continued to draw police attention. You see, in the year 2000, he was accused of stalking a cashier at a grocery store. He wasn't charged, but was given a no trespass order for the supermarket, an order to stay away from the women. A few years later, Stanley and his family were living in Collingwood, Ontario. This was a ski town on the southern tip of Georgian Bay, about a 2-hour drive north of Toronto, and it was here that Stanley was convicted of harassing his female neighbor. Court documents say that when the 25-year-old rebuffed his romantic gestures, he wouldn't give up. He would park in front of her residence and would sit and stare. He also made false allegations to the Children's Aid Society about how she treated her younger son. He was given a suspended sentence in June 2005. You know what? This Stanley guy, what a dirty bastard. Just weird, innit? Standing outside her house. In fact, he went to child services and reported her to be an abusive mother simply because she didn't like him. You dirty, dirty mother. Then Stanley and his family moved to Peterborough, Ontario, where police say he was on their radar right from the day he arrived, mainly because he was on probation for the stalking I just mentioned. The first hint of trouble came when Stanley allegedly offered a 12-year-old girl a fake job at the YMCA. Why are you giving 12-year-olds a fake job? Wait, why are you giving 12-year-olds a job in the first place? So she went and told her mum. Her mum called the police, but no charges were laid. A similar interaction played out a short while later when Stanley approached a young woman at the local Walmart where she was looking for a job. Records show Stanley showed up at the woman's home on at least 3 occasions, once leaving a birthday card signed Jason. He also told her that her duties at the YMCA would include work on behalf of the police. When Stanley ran into the woman a few days later at Taco Bell, again looking for a job, he berated her, saying he had already promised her employment. Court records indicated he even brought an application form with him to the fast food restaurant. The woman just found him weird, so she reached out to the YMCA directly and was told there was no openings and no employee named Jason. So she went and called the police. Police moved to arrest Stanley, searching his home and seizing his van. They found duct tape, rope, plastic sheets, plastic cable ties, and a hammer and a knife under the driver's seat. In Stanley's home, there was a pellet pistol hidden in the basement. Stanley pleaded guilty to criminal harassment and was sentenced to 2 years in prison. But the most serious charge against this muppet came in August 2008. You see, Stanley, right, he was driving home and it was August 6th. It was around midnight. He came across 2 young girls strumbling drunk in the streets. Stanley offered them a ride in his van, dropping one of the girls at the park. He then drove off with the other, who was 12. The child was found naked from the waist down outside a school in Ontario. When the girl was found, neighbors were calling the police. They kept hearing screams. When the police arrived, they saw a man walking toward a red van in the school's back parking lot. He ignored police's commands to stop, jumping into the vehicle and driving away, mounting a curb to do so. An officer gave chase, but it was eventually called off. It became too dangerous on the town's sleepy residential streets. The officer did manage, however, to get the van's license plate as well as a look at the driver. This driver was later identified as Stanley Tippett, aka Dirty Bastard. Noting that the features of the man's head and face were very distinctive, the van, which was found abandoned in Oshawa, was registered to Stanley. Police found 2 used condoms inside the vehicle, and the victim's clothes were found near the scene at the school. Then, when DNA was collected, there wasn't enough of it to match it to anybody but the victim. Still, in December 2009, Stanley was convicted of 7 counts related to the attack, including kidnapping, sexual assault, and sexual interference. To this day, Stanley, who pleaded not guilty to the charges, maintained his innocence, saying he too was the victim of a crime and was ultimately wrongly convicted. In his telling of what happened that night, Stanley was giving the girl a ride home when he was carjacked by 2 men, who threw him out of the vehicle and took off. Stanley says he landed in a ditch and had to climb out. He then walked a short distance so he could call his wife, who ordered him a cab, which he took to his uncle's place nearby in order to report the carjacking. Evidence at Stanley's trial showed there were traces of semen on the girl's tank top from 2 different men, which support his carjacking claim. He alleged it was these men who did this to the girl, but these samples that the police found were very small. Millions fewer sperm cells than you would normally see if there was recent sexual activity. Stanley, were you firing blanks, my man? A forensic expert at Stanley's trial testified that a laundry transfer, where trace amounts of a substance can transfer from one item of clothing to another in the wash, was one plausible explanation for the 2 sets of sperm cells on the victim's tank top. In his ruling, the judge who found Stanley guilty noted that the victim's clothing had only her DNA on it. Because of this, Stanley filed an appeal, but he lost. The appeal judge conceded the Wilder trial judge erred by not mentioning the men's sperm cells in his initial ruling. The error was not significant. In fact, he noted that the male DNA proved nothing. There wasn't enough of a sample to match it to anyone. The DNA did not point to someone else sexually assaulting the 12-year-old, nor did it convict Stanley. It was simply inconclusive. The other evidence, including witness testimony, was enough to convict Stanley. Therefore, Stanley was declared a dangerous offender in October 2011 and was handed an indeterminate sentence, meaning he could remain jailed for the rest of his life. I don't think anyone's going to complain, sir. Stanley was last denied parole in 2018. He is currently housed in Beaver Creek Institution. This is a minimum and medium security prison located in Gravenhurst, in the heart of Ontario's cottage country. He was moved there from Warkworth Institution closer to Peterborough after a number of violent incidents. It's probable that Stanley has been targeted while imprisoned, both for his appearance and due to a hierarchy common in prisons, meaning those accused of sexually assaulting children are often the most despised. You all know that. But for the most serious charge, the 2008 assault, Stanley maintained his innocence and said he regrets picking up the young girls. But he asks people to consider the circumstances. It was after midnight, they were drunk, they were on the road. But I want to talk to you about his psychiatric profile. You see, when he was seen by a psychiatrist, they described him as a sensation seeker. He's an impulsive individual with personality disorder. He is duplicitous and a narcissist. But in all of this, it goes back to the Anandavel family. See, today they live in Ottawa, where they moved soon after Sharmini's remains were found. Both of her brothers say they don't have many memories from the time. They've forgotten or perhaps blocked from their minds, but both are among those who believe Stanley was their sister's killer. Sharmini's murder was listed as homicide number 36 for 1999, remains classified as a cold case, meaning there are no leads left to follow the investigation. Detective Sergeant Stacey Gallant, who is in charge of cold cases for the Toronto Police, confirms his team reinvestigated the killing in 2011 after they received new information. Unfortunately, between the 2 investigations, the one in the 90s and the one in 2011, they were unable to bring in to the point where anyone could be arrested or prosecution could be mounted. Gallant declined to specify what new information was brought forward, but the timeline coincides with Stanley's dangerous offender hearing. Cold cases are also kinda hard to prove. Witnesses may have died or moved away to a new address, and the passage of time can erase memory, details can often be forgotten. So, to conclude on this story, I don't know what triggered this moron, but he obviously loved a cat and mouse chase. He loved the thrill. I'm going to give her this application form. I'm going to make her come to me, right? Make her come to me, and then I'm going to satisfy whatever it is he feels and take her life. It seems he got some kind of thrill from doing this. From the woman whose house he was stalking outside, reporting her to the child services, to the other 12-year-old girls, to which he was eventually convicted. This human being can best be described, his entire existence can be broken down into 2 words. Dirty bastard. Comment, tell me what you think.